Hello all and welcome to The Big Story, a daily news show where we talk about the hottest topics of today right in the heart of the newsroom. I'm Kimberly Jiao coming to you live from the Straits Times, and we are streaming on YouTube and Facebook, so do leave us a comment, like and share it with your friends, as well as hit the bell to be told whenever we go live. I'll be joined by a couple of my newsroom colleagues today to discuss what got you talking today. Our first story. A year after taxis and private hire cars were allowed to have inward-facing video cameras, the LTA said on Tuesday that these cameras are also allowed to make audio recordings, citing that it makes the recordings more effective in supporting investigations into inappropriate or violent behaviour, as well as fare-related disputes. So with me to talk about this is senior transport correspondent Christopher Tan. Hello.
Hello.
So let's talk about this privacy aspect. People are comparing it to CCTV recordings. Is this the same?
No, not quite. I think for CCTVs in public places, you are in an open space and you don't linger, right? Your image is going to be captured in a very fleeting manner, unless you loiter, right? And on buses and trains, you have the anonymity of a crowd.
Right.
But in a cab, you are the only person most of the time.
Yeah.
So that feeling of a camera recording every movement of yours, every noise that you make, I think it's a bit discomforting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, a bit unnerving.
It's very scary, I would say.
Yeah, yeah.
And you'd say in one of your, I think in your article you mentioned it, upright citizens should not fear.
Yeah. So, but do upright citizens want to have cameras in their homes, or at work, or when they're dining out? You know, I mean, there's a degree to where you want to push this thing in the name of preventing inappropriate behavior or crime or violence, right? The Taxi Association has said that you'll help to stamp out fare evasion. But if you look at the numbers, a year we have only about 200 odd cases of fare evasion, and out of 200 over million trips. So having this camera system and audio-visual recording may be likened to us having a sledgehammer to kill an ant. Do we want that? Because all these things cost money, right? Eventually the cost will filter down. Who's going to bear the cost?
Yeah.
And they're not going to be cheap. If you want a camera system that captures every angle of a cab or a car, it'll have to be, maybe 2 or 3.
Right, one camera's not going to cut.
No, yeah, because if I'm up to mischief, I can sit behind the driver, and I'll be hidden.
You'll be out of shot.
Right, I could wear dark glasses, and face masks, as a lot of people do nowadays.
Yeah.
For some reason or another. Yeah.
Maybe it's because it makes it easier to commit crime. So you would say, in your personal opinion, you think this method doesn't really justify?
I think not. I think there are other ways of tackling the problem. If let's say it's fare evasion, and if it's 200 odd cases,
right,
and we are told that half of them get solved, right, and half of them, the LTA helps to track down the person, and then fares are paid.
Right.
So we're talking only about 100 odd cases, and if say the average fare of $10 each, it's not much,
right.
$1,000 odd dollars, right? And a camera system in one cab is probably going to cost a lot more than that.
Okay, understand.
Right. So if it's going to be $1,000 to $2,000, well, it could come from a pool, it could come from the company, right? And every business is exposed to non-payment risks, right? In restaurants, people run off without paying.
Right. It happens.
Right? So what is the problem actually? I mean, if you're talking about violence against the driver, then maybe you want to consider a hard barrier. Like in some cities, they have a hard barrier between the driver and the passenger. But that would, of course, project a wrong, not so desirable image about Singapore, right? Being safe and all that. And also impedes the driver's movement. Some drivers who wouldn't like that, they feel like they are hemmed in, right? So, got to weigh everything quite carefully before we take steps to tackle problems which may not be as big as we think.
Right.
Right.
Especially when it comes to cost. Earlier on off screen, you're sort of mentioning that LTA actually manages to cover the costs anyway and get back the cost, the thing sort of fares that people pay.
Half the cases of tax evasion they manage to recover. Yeah, on average.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's
not a huge amount. It's not a huge amount.
Right.
And like I said, it's 200 cases out of 200 over million trips.
Seems like overkill.
Yeah, yeah.
So with this in mind, and considering the fact that privacy is really being a little bit invaded in this case, do you think there is anything we can do about it?
Well, I find it interesting that the Privacy Commission said something like, if you feel like you don't want to be videoed, you could always choose not to take these transport modes, right? But what choices do we have? If let's say the operators go ahead and install these cameras, that would mean buses, trains, taxis, and private hire. And that kind of rules out everything. So except, the only alternative that you have is to buy your own car. I mean, we are pushing for public transport here, car light and all that.
Yeah.
Wrong messaging, right? And it's like, suck it up,
Yeah, that does seem to be the message. But if you have any ideas do you have any opinions about this, do leave them in the comments down below. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us, Chris.
Welcome.
And if you'd like to keep up with this story as it develops or listen to other transport stories, do head on to www.straitstimes.com. Our next story, last Friday, Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam announced that up to 5 new digital bank licenses will be issued in Singapore, paving the way for non-bank players to break into a local financial services scene dominated by a handful of traditional providers. Our associate editor Vikram wrote an opinion piece about this, and with me to discuss this further is Vikram himself. Hello.
Hello, Kimberly.
So could you tell us a little bit more, what are the conditions of these licenses?
Okay. There are two categories of banks. One is wholesale banks, which will cater to businesses alone and corporates, and the other is retail banks, which will cater to consumers, right? So there are different conditions for each category. One common condition is that they all have to be headquartered in Singapore, and controlled by Singaporeans, so they come under the purview of local regulatory authorities.
Right.
The second one is that they must obey the same regulations as incumbent banks, as the existing banks, right? The third is that they must have clear value propositions. Okay, they can't just replicate existing services. They must try to serve people who are underserved or not served at all.
Okay.
Yeah, so these three. Then for the retail banks, they have to first prove themselves.
Okay.
That is to say, they will first be called restricted banks, so they can only take a limited amount of deposits, like 50 million in total, and they must cater to their staff, their business associates, and immediate stakeholders. They can't just open up straight away to the general public.
I see.
The reason is that they must first iron out the kinks in their business model. They must, make sure their risk management systems are in place, working well. And once they satisfy the regulators on all these counts, then they can be licensed as full digital banks, right? It's kind of like I mentioned in my article, it's like a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
When a new restaurant is opened, first the owners have to please their family and their friends. They have to test out their recipes. They can't just straight away start serving the general public, right? They've got to make sure everything is working well. And when that happens, when the regulators are satisfied, when there are certain profitability metrics and all that are met, then they can graduate to becoming full digital banks, right? And then they can take more deposits. And then, of course, the capital that they have to put in also increases from 15 million to 1.5 billion. Okay. Yeah, quite a big jump. So these are some of the conditions. These are some of the key ones. Yeah.
I see. So with digital banks coming to Singapore, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, what exactly is this? What's the big deal? What's so great about them?
What's so great? Well, the biggest advantage that digital banks have is lower costs.
Okay.
Okay, because they don't have to maintain this big branch network. They have no branches. Huh?
Okay.
Zero, no branches. They are allowed one office, one physical place of business.
Okay.
So they don't have this big branch network to maintain, which is very costly. They don't have to maintain an ATM network, right? So if they have these lower costs, then they'll be able to offer maybe better rates. Yeah, which is actually the practice in most of the world. They offer much better rates on deposits, for example. They offer much better exchange rates when you transfer money. They have lower fees, because normal banks have to recoup costs of branches, costs of ATMs. So you don't get such a good deal on these things.
Right.
Another advantage is that they have very friendly customer experience setups. Okay, so for example, in other countries, you can get a debit card hand delivered to your home in 24 hours.
Wow.
You can speak to a human 24/7, you know, not a bot. Then the bank's offerings come integrated with things like Gojek, Grab, and so on seamlessly.
Right.
So you just when you take a Grab, it gets automatically deducted from your account very simply, and of course they offer better rates. And then you have 5-minute account opening and things like that. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a pretty decent customer experience that these people offer.
And you've mentioned earlier as well when we were off screen that they save a lot of costs because they now have new technology, whereas traditional banks have to rely on their legacy technology.
That's actually an important point. I'm glad you raised it. So they have state-of-the-art technology. Okay, they have cloud services. Banks have legacy technology. Then the digital banks also use AI. Okay, AI and big data to assess credit worthiness. So you can get loans without collateral.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So a lot of the banks in China, for example, WeBank, which is run by WeChat, and WePay, which is run by Alibaba, they use big data. They assess your credit based on the data they've collected about you, right? So they don't demand collateral. So that makes it easier for them to lend, right? So that's also a big advantage. The use of modern technology, the latest technology, makes a big advantage, yeah.
And speaking of all these advantages, I have to ask what the disadvantages are of digital banks.
The disadvantages are, first of all, they don't have branches.
Okay.
There are times when you would like to go to a branch, that you would like face-to-face contact. There are certain services in banking, such as like investment advisory, wealth management. If you're going to invest $100,000, you want to meet somebody and discuss it, right? You're not going to just do it with an online entity.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people feel that way. That's number one. And number two, they have no ATMs. Okay, so if you want cash, they have some workarounds to that. For example, some of them use convenience stores. So there's already a startup, not a startup anymore, but it's a fintech in Singapore, which called SoCash, which enables you to go to a convenience store to either deposit or withdraw cash using QR codes.
Right.
So there's this workaround, but having ATMs is a convenience. And I suppose the biggest disadvantage, if you like, is trust.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, the existing banks, DBS, OCBC, UOB, have been here decades.
Well established.
Well established, very trusted, and solid, you know. So, I think consumers might be a little wary at first of shifting large amounts of money to digital banks because they trust the existing banks. I think digital banks have the challenge of building trust, which will not be an immediate thing. It'll be a slow process.
And
so
there are also
another
companies like Grab, right, who you said before, that are not very profit-making companies.
Yeah, I mean, some of them, for example, they're not yet profitable.
Not yet.
Yeah, they're living off venture capital. They're very well funded, but they're not yet internally profitable. So that might be an issue. But then again, it depends on who they partner with. Because they can partner with a big entity, like Singtel, for example. Then that's okay. They'll feel, people might feel comfortable enough. But in general, I think it's difficult for people to switch banks. I mean, people are not always willing to immediately switch. They might nibble a little bit at the offerings of digital banks, but to move their whole relationship, to bank their salaries, things like that, that might take a while.
Maybe not so soon.
Not so fast. But over time it'll happen. In some other countries it has happened. Yeah.
So would you say then that with all that in mind, that traditional banks don't really have anything to worry about? They shouldn't be threatened by digital banking?
Well, they certainly don't face an existential threat. Okay. What they do face is competitive threat in certain areas. Okay. So in certain areas such as like remittances, like payments, the digital banks offer a much better deal. And in fact, a lot of Singaporeans are already using fintechs to do some of these kind of transactions. You get wholesale exchange rates, you get better no-fee transfers, and so on. So in those areas, I think the traditional banks face a competitive threat. It's already happening, right? But in terms of their deposit base, I think they're pretty secure.
Okay.
As I said, it won't be easy for people to just shift their deposits to the new digital banks.
Right.
It won't happen in a hurry. Yeah. Then, of course, they offer face-to-face contact, right? So for certain services, investment advisory, and so on, that's a big advantage. Yeah, and they are trusted.
So with their captive audience, or current audience, you would say, kind of stable for now, but they can use this time to keep up and be a little more competitive.
Yes, so they will be under pressure to raise their game. You know, they might be under pressure to, for example, charge lower rates, offer better rates, charge lower fees. Maybe they'll change the way their branches work. Maybe they'll make the branches more attractive places to visit rather than just boring offices.
Right.
There's some consultants who say that they should turn them into funky cafes or, you know, members-only lounges,
Right.
where it becomes fun to go to a branch
Yeah.
rather than a kind of a chore.
And
right?
it's something that they have over the digital banks anyway.
That's right. That's an advantage they have that they can leverage. Yeah.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing more on this with us.
Thank you.
If you'd like to read more of Vikram's opinion piece, do head on to www.straitstimes.com and as well for other developments on this story. And those were our top stories of the day. Once again, I'm Kimberly. Thank you for watching The Big Story, and we'll see you tomorrow.